Good evening, and thanks for joining tonight's TI Technology webinar hosted by Texas Instruments. For tonight, we're going to continue our webinar series in computer science and take a look at another advanced topic, manipulating text with string processing. My name is Mike Houston, and I'm the moderator for this event. I teach algebra and calculus near Pittsburgh, where I use TI technology to make tough-to-teach, tough-to-learn concepts accessible to all my students. Tonight, we're joined by two panelists, Tony Norrell and Michelle Reinhardt. Tony has over 25 years of teaching experience from 5th grade all the way up to college algebra. She works as a math specialist and a TQ regional instructor, and she is a recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching. Currently, she and Michelle are developing and delivering computer science professional development in Texas. Tony, it's so good to have you with us tonight.
Hi, Mike. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
And born and raised in rural Ontario, Michelle studied mathematics, physics, and education before moving to Texas. Michelle has taught high school math and science at rural districts in Texas, while also working as a math and science consultant throughout the state. Her interests include technology integration, conceptual understanding, and curriculum and instruction. Michelle, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
We're expecting a large crowd, so your audio is muted. Feel free at any time if you have any questions for Michelle or Tony to submit those questions in the Q&A window. We'll also be using the chat window to send general messages. As a reminder, this session is being recorded, and we'll provide a link to the event certificate of attendance at the conclusion of the webinar. We hope you don't have any audio issues tonight, but in the event that you do, try finding the Communicate at the top of the WebEx menu and choose Audio Broadcast, and then click Play. At this point, Michelle, would you mind discussing our agenda for tonight?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks, Mike. So we're going to look at a number of topics as we dig into how we can manipulate text and use some different string processing commands. So we'll start by looking at how we can collect string input from a user and then also display and format that string output back to the user. We will run into some concerns about the different data types, and we'll have to come up with some ways to kind of fix some things around that. We'll also look at how we can display characters, specific characters from within strings, and then we'll make some connections to or between strings and the TI Innovator Hub and Rover. And last, we'll wrap up by kind of modeling some problems with strings and also searching strings as well. So lots to kind of think about, and we'll start right at the beginning in just a few minutes.
Thanks, Michelle. And Tony, would you mind discussing our expected outcomes for tonight?
Sure. So at the end of this session, you will have manipulated text with string processing, concatenated and formatted strings for user output, applied string formatting to solve problems and code solutions, and reviewed important topics for the computer science certification exam. And in case you missed the first webinar on arrays or the second webinar on creating user-defined functions, including recursion, these were recorded and these can be found on the TI website. And the next webinar will be May 21st, and the topic will be constructing searching and sorting algorithms.
Thanks so much, Tony. In case anyone needs it, I just posted the link in the chat window, the shortcut to find those on-demand webinars, which are the ones that are recorded, or you can also look at the live webinars, which are the ones that are up and coming. Michelle, let me give you control, and it'll be all yours. All right, Michelle.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Go ahead and get a couple things set up here as we get started. So in our work this evening, we're going to focus on this particular standard, which comes from the computer science certification exam in Texas, and other states have their own kind of certification standards, or if not certification standards, then they have their own computer science standards. And so again, we're looking at ideas related to data types, data structures and functions in the development of code, but specifically we're looking at demonstrating the ability to manipulate text using string processing functions, including concatenation, substring, and search, and there's lots of little ideas from other standards that will pop up in this work as well. So we just start with that to kind of frame our thinking for our time here together. So with that, let's just jump over and kind of get right into coding. So as we launch into this webinar, we're going to start with some introductory string work, and then we'll progress into more complex string formatting ideas throughout our time together. I'd also encourage you to have the chat kind of pulled up in your webinar space so that you can interact with your peers throughout the webinar, sharing questions, some of your thinking, et cetera, as we work through. So let's start with the kind of quintessential first program in computer science. So I'm going to, oops, keep making the same mistake, sorry y'all. Add a program editor, add a new program, and let's go ahead and call this program hello. And the kind of the first program that many people write in computer science has a computer say hello world to the user. And so for starters, our program will only include one line of code, and we'll just ask the calculator to display the text hello world. So in the TI-Nspire programming language, we use a command called disp, and it's in the input-output menu. And we're going to use this command called disp to display text to the user. And so I've inserted the command called disp, and then I'll insert some quotations on the calculator. You can do that by pushing Control and the multiplication button. And then I'll type in whatever I want the message to be. So I'm going to say hello world, maybe like this. And notice how this message is typed in quotations, and this signals to the computer that we literally want to display the string of characters, which we abbreviate to a string, shown exactly as we see inside these quotation marks.
So Michelle, the handheld really doesn't care if I misspell words or use slang words inside of the quotation?
Ooh, like if I get in a hurry and do something like this, then like will it kind of auto-correct for me or whatnot? Yeah, let's see what happens. So I'm going to run this program, and one way to do that is to go Menu, check Syntax and Store, option number 2, and then there's a Run. Notice also that there's a Control-R shortcut for this, so I'm going to use that shortcut as we move throughout the webinar. Let's go ahead and run this program, and there's the name of my program, hello, and if I push Enter, it should run. So that's interesting, Tony, like your question of it doesn't matter if we spell it correctly. Do you want to talk more about that? Because you kind of have a nice way of thinking about this.
So when we put things in quotations, I look at it as that's a literal string. And so really the handheld doesn't pay any attention to what's inside of those quotations. It just displays exactly what I put in there.
Right. Yeah, so there it is displaying it exactly what we said before with the same punctuation, et cetera. Okay. So our program works as intended, but like, woohoo, like it's not very interesting or interactive. And so we might wonder, how might we edit or enhance this program to make it a bit more engaging? So thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was wondering, could we get the program to ask the user for their name?
Yes, that's a good idea. Okay, so before it displays, I'm going to insert a blank line here, sorry, and then you're saying we're going to ask the user for their name maybe, and then display that name back to them. Does that sound right, Tony?
That sounds great.
Okay, let's try it. So I'm going to go back to menu, and I think I'm going to go back to this input-output menu, but instead of displaying, we're actually going to request some information from the user that we could then kind of use in the program. So let's try it. So I'm going to grab that request statement, and then the syntax for request looks like this. We're again going to use quotations, and inside those quotations, we're going to have a message to the user letting them know what we're even looking for. So let's say, what's your name? How about that? Question mark. Okay.
Sounds good.
So I'm going to run this. Yeah. I'm going to run this. Are there any changes I should make to that, or will this kind of work as we expect? Feel free to share some of your thinking in the chat about what you think will happen if I go ahead and run this, like what problems, if any, there might be with it. And I'll go ahead and kind of run it as well. Oh. So I push Control-R, and y'all, I'm getting this error message before it even goes over and runs it. It's saying too few arguments. The function or command is missing one or more arguments. I'm going to push OK. Nope, it's mad. Anyone have any thoughts about what is going on here?
Michelle, I see that we need some sort of variable. That request needs a variable. We're asking for something, and so we need a variable in there.
Okay, gotcha. And sometimes we imply that, like I asked you what your name was, like I'm assuming that that would be stored in some place called name, but we actually have to make that explicit in the code. So after our kind of question here to the user, we would need a comma, and then we need the variable name. So let's actually name that variable name, because that's what the data we're going to store into that place. So I wonder if that will kind of take care of what was going wrong there. So let me run this one now. Oh, at least we got to this screen. This is progress. And I'm going to push enter to run it. And it says, what's your name? And I'll say, Michelle. Now what happens? Yeah, this is the story of my life. Let's do go to and see what's going on. What? Request, what's your name? Store it to name. I'm going to run it again, see what happens. So, hello, what's your name? I said Michelle. Variable is not defined. No value is assigned to the variable. Use one of the following. I go to and it takes me back to this line. Does anyone have any idea, like, what in the world is going on here? Like, this statement looks correct. We have this message to the user, and then we're going to store it into a variable. Does anyone see kind of what, if anything, is going on with this?
So, Michelle, I have one suggestion for a different command for request str, request string. Can we go back and look at the menu?
Okay, let's do that. So into menu and into input-output, because that's where we were before, and notice, oh, that's interesting. So there's two request statements. There's a request or a request str. And so think to yourself, like, what might the difference be between those two statements? When might you use request, and when might you use request str, and how are they different? So yeah, this is actually completely on point, and it's something I forget about all the time, and then I'll write a program and run it like we just did and kind of run into a problem. So let's look at this for just a second. Instead of using request, I'm actually going to delete that out of there. We use request str instead. And Karina's sharing in the chat that request is probably for numbers and request str is probably for strings. And that's exactly right. That it turns out that the TI-Nspire coding language has these two different request statements, request and request str, and they have different purposes. So the request, just the request like that, statement expects numeric input. So when I ran this a second ago and it asked me for my name, it was expecting a number and I gave it a string. So it was expecting to receive an int or a float data type, a numeric data type. But request str expects text-based input or to receive input of a char or a string data type. So this idea about data type and possible mismatches of data type is a really important idea in computer science, and it will likely come up again and again as we think about string formatting. So thank you all for sharing kind of your thinking and your questions and your comments in the chat. That's a great way for us to all kind of stay engaged with these ideas. So we changed request to request str because we're expecting a string or basically some text to come in as a response. Let's go ahead and run this program again and see if it works. So run it. What's your name? Michelle. Oh, I get nervous. Okay. Oh, it worked. It like took the data, but then notice what it displays. It just displays hello world. And so then we might think, so how can we fix that, y'all? Like, what could we do so that it says hello to me? It says hello, Michelle. So feel free to share some of your thoughts about that in the chat about how we could kind of switch that up. And Tony, do you have any thoughts on things we should try for that as well?
Well, I'm thinking we should put name in there. Maybe where you have world, we should just put name and see if that works.
Ooh, like this. Yeah, maybe?
Yeah, I think we should try that.
Okay, so let's try it. And then, again, feel free to share in the chat some of your thinking about what this will do or not do, kind of make a prediction. So I'm going to go ahead and run this one. Hello, what's your name? Michelle, okay. So what happened there? Yeah, story of my life again. What happened there? Can anyone kind of put into words why that, like, didn't work, didn't do what we expected?
So I'm getting some suggestions with name, not, I guess we don't want name inside the quotations because it's going to print it out exactly like it says.
Yeah, like what you were saying earlier, Tony, about the literal string, right? Like it literally thinks we're saying print that, okay? Great, and great descriptions in the chat about what was kind of going wrong with that. I think there was also an idea of what we could maybe do to fix that. So someone had something like, I'm kind of changing this up a little bit maybe, but they used the ampersand maybe, and then had name like this. Does that look right?
Yes, that's what Jenny was suggesting.
Okay. So what does this do? Like, what does the ampersand do in this case? And we can go ahead and run it to see what happens. What's your name? Michelle. And then it says hello, comma, Michelle. So here we see that we're concatenating these two strings, the string of hello and the string that's stored in the variable called name, into one line of code. And to concatenate means to join two or more strings together into one string. And in the TI-Nspire programming language, the ampersand is the symbol that's used for concatenation. So far, our code looks like this, hello, comma, concatenated with name or and name. But when we run it, I mean, it does what we're saying, but it's not pretty yet, right? Like, it's kind of all one word, and maybe I want a space there. Maybe I want an exclamation mark at the end. And so take a second. Yeah, go for it, Tony. So, like, maybe take a second and share in the chat, like, what could this line look like? What would this line look like if it was spaced out properly and if there was an exclamation point at the end? Take a minute and share some of your thinking for that in the chat. It's just kind of like our rough draft talk. We're just making it up. We're just trying it out and sharing with our colleagues here. So take a minute to think about what would that whole line of code look like if this was spaced out a little better and if there was an exclamation point at the end.
So I think, Michelle, we're going to have to figure out where that space goes. Is that space going to go after the comma inside of the quotations, or does it go after the ampersand? Because I'm seeing comments about both of these.
That's neat. Let's try them both. So one thing you said was after the comma, inside the quotes. Let's see what that does. Run it. Michelle. Hello, space, Michelle. Oh, okay, so that one worked. And then the other one you said was instead of in here, what if we put it like here? Does that look right? Like right after the ampersand but before the name. Let's see what happens. Oh, that didn't work. And now when I go back into my code, see how it deleted that space, right? Like it thought that that was an extraneous space. So y'all are right. We want to put that extra space inside the quotes, which sometimes makes our code kind of a little bit harder to read. Like you have to look for and make sense of why is that there? What's that doing? I also saw some people try to tackle the whole how do we put a exclamation point at the end. Tony, did you see any code on that?
Yes, I see somebody suggesting to put the ampersand and then put the exclamation point inside of quotations as another literal string.
Neat. So we're going to have hello and a space, then the name, and then this exclamation point right up against the name. We think. Let's try it. So let's run this. What's your name? Michelle. Hello, space, Michelle, exclamation mark. Neat. So
Great.
lots of kind of little ideas in there about how we can format and intentionally leave spaces, concatenate a number of different things, et cetera. Awesome. So good so far. We've kind of run into lots of different error messages along the way, which is great. That's how we learn. What else? What else were we going to do with this one, Tony, before we move on from it?
Why don't we try to add something like asking for your age?
Ooh, okay, so like another request statement or whatnot. Okay, let's do it. So we're going to add another request statement, and we're going to go down to input-output. Remember, we had two choices. We could request or request string. If we're going to ask for age, though, we should use, what do y'all think? Request, probably, because we would expect a numeric value to come back in?
Yes, that's what I'm seeing in the comments.
Okay, so let's give it a try. So we're going to use a request statement, and we're going to ask the user, how old are you? Question mark. And then we learned last time that you had to have a comma, and then you have to have a variable name, right? So we want to call this one age. Like, we'll just store it into a variable that we make up called age. And then I'd like us to, we're going to do a disp statement here in a second, but here's what I would like your display to look like, okay? So I'm going to write it out just in, not in a string, like just in words, and this is ideally what it looks like on the screen. So I would like the display to say something like, you are blank years old. Oops, I can't spell. So that's ideally what we want the message to pop up as, where that blank actually represents whatever they entered in as their age. So if you will, take a minute and complete this disp line in the chat. Like, what should this line of code look like if it were to have an output of what we're seeing on this next line, something like, you are blank years old. So take a minute and share some of your thinking in the chat, and then we'll touch base with that in just a minute. And again, feel free to kind of take some risks here, give it a try. We're all learning together, so thanks for sharing your thinking.
So Michelle, I'm seeing in the chat the same idea that I would suggest as well. And
okay.
So they're suggesting to display in quotations you are, and then use
okay.
the ampersand for age.
Okay.
And then ampersand, and then quotations for years old, period.
Neat. So something like this?
Right. And so we're concatenating these three things together, and so we think that should work.
Neat. Okay. I also saw some slight differences from this in the chat, so we'll kind of see how that ties in a minute. I'm going to erase this line for now because it's not going to run. That's like just something for us to think about. Oh, I see some people sharing that about spaces, right? Like someone saying you'll need a space after the word are. And again, if we hadn't have done that, we could have run it and seen what happens. But if without that space, I think what we'd have is you are, and then the very next character after that would have been the number for the age, right? Something like that.
Right.
Okay. And then, and then Karina says also put one right before years old. Which again makes, I forgot the one right before after R. So kind of a space here and a space here perhaps. Yeah, let's try it and see kind of what happens. Okay, so I'm going to Control R to run the program. Hello, what's your name? It's still Michelle. How old are you? I think I'm around 34. Okay. Darn it. Like every time, Tony, this happens to me. But look at our error this time, y'all. Invalid data type. An argument is of the wrong data type. Let's go to GoTo and see what's up, like see what might be going on with this. And it takes me to this line, y'all. Any thoughts? Like what? I mean, I was sold. I thought we were good to go with this line. Anyone have any ideas on why we're getting an error of incorrect data type?
So, Michelle, a couple of people are hitting on what I think you said earlier, because they're talking about age is not a string. And I remember when you were talking about concatenating, we used the ampersand to concatenate two or more strings together. but age is not a string is what I'm seeing in the comments.
Yeah, and that's so true. Like when we made the decision to use this request statement, we said the input we get back from the user will be numeric, right? So age is actually a numeric variable, either a float or an int. And so it's not a string, and so we can't concatenate a numeric variable with these strings on either side of it, right? Is that kind of what you're saying, Tony?
Yes, and so how do we make that into a string?
Yeah, good question. And so that is something we can fix. We can actually change from one data type to another, and there's a command in the Nspire programming language which is just string. And so I'm going to string, quote unquote, this variable called age, and that will kind of cast it, at least in this instance of it, into a string version of itself, I think, so that it can act as a string and then be concatenated with the other strings before and after it. Maybe? Let's give it a try. So let's run this. Name's Michelle. How old are you? Still about 34? Nice. You are 34 years old. And look at that spacing before and after the 34. Nice, y'all. Other thoughts on that one? Okay. So from there, we're actually going to cycle back to something we saw a few webinars ago. And in a previous webinar, we were looking at this program where we had a blank array. So we actually started with an empty array, I guess I should say. And we called it array, very creative naming there. And our goal was to ask the user for 5 different elements to add into the array. And so we're going to do this request statement 5 times. And when we kind of did this webinar before, we didn't talk much about how we were actually concatenating this message and changing up this kind of request statement we're seeing here, but we wanted to come back to it now in light of the work that we're doing here. And so my question to y'all is this. When I run this program in just a minute, what message will pop up to the user when this request statement runs? What do you expect to see? What message will pop up when we run this program? And don't worry about this comma array at I at the end of the string. We're really focusing on the first kind of part of this request statement. So take a minute and see if you have any, let's see what thoughts you can share about that. Like what will that message look like that pops up to the user when I run this in just a second?
So Michelle, I'm getting a comment about we're going to see where it's going to ask us to add an entry to element 1.
Okay, let's try it and see. So I'm going to run this program. Actually, I want to switch back over to the handheld view for running it. And, oh, add entry to element 1. So say we add the value 10. And then add entry to element 2. So see how it's kind of iterating through the different element numbers.
Nice.
From the array.
And that's exactly what they were saying in the comments. Good job.
Nice, nice. So at the time, we didn't spend much time thinking about the string formatting and why we had to do and string I. Like why couldn't we just say and I, because I was incrementing from 1 to 5, but we needed to have that string command around it because that's what changed that numeric variable into a string variable. I want to go back to one more thing because I saw a question in the chat which was interesting. Sarah asked, hey, couldn't we have just changed this to a request str and captured age as a string already, right? I think that's kind of what she was saying, instead of capturing it as a numeric variable. So like, let's see if that would work. So now I've changed this request statement to a requesting a string. So let's see what happens. What's your name? Michelle? How old are you? 34. Like, y'all, those are numbers. What's going to happen if I push enter? Are we going to end up with a data type issue? Let's see what happens. It totally worked. Why?
Interesting.
And part of the answer here is that a string is any combination of alphanumeric characters, right? And other characters as well, but any letters, any numbers. So it's okay for 34 to be entered as a string. It's not okay for ABC to be entered as a numeric variable, right? It doesn't go both ways. Why we tend not to do this, though, is when we have age as a string instead of as a number, then we can't later do things like this. We can't say, hey, is Michelle old enough to drive? Like if age is greater than 18, because this kind of comparison statement will only work if age is recognized as a number. Do you know what I mean? So that's why we tend to capture numeric entries as numbers instead of as strings. Great question. Oops, totally craziness. Sorry, y'all. Okay, what next? Tony, where do you want to go next? I'm supposed to know that, aren't I? Let's see.
Well, I want to. Yeah, I'd like to look at this mid command.
Oh, yeah. This is one we just stumbled across recently, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to this program we were looking at with like request string, what's your name, blah, 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 and I'm going to delete all of our hard work or 3/4 of our hard work, kind of clear out all this part. And instead, we'll just capture the person's name and call it name, but then we're going to look at a new command we haven't used yet. And so we're still using disp, we're still going to display something, but there's this new, or new to us, new to Tony and I command called mid, and it takes at least 2 arguments. So we're going to run the mid command on the string called name, and let's run it at, I don't know, mid name, comma 3, okay? And what I'd like you to think about is what does this command do? And I'm going to run it a couple times, making some changes to it, and I'd like you to kind of make a conjecture about how this command mid, called mid, works. So let me go ahead and run this. What's your name? Michelle. Looks good. And then here's the output for mid, comma 3. That's interesting. What would happen if we ran mid of name, comma 5? Let's run that one. Still Michelle. And now we're just getting L. Okay. So again, be sharing some of your thinking in the chat. And then I'm going to add one more kind of curveball to this. You can actually add another comma into the mid command and another number. So now I'm going to run something like mid name 5, comma 2, and now run it. And again, your task is to kind of make sense of and share in the chat what in the world is this command doing and what do the different numbers in it do. So mid at 5, comma 2 outputs this, EL, You run it one more time with some different input. What if we do, yeah, maybe like 2, comma 5? Run that. So take a minute and kind of share in the chat, what do you think the mid command is doing? This version up top, this is what happened when we had 5, comma 2, and this is what it output when we did 2, comma 5. So try to put into words, again, feel free to use your rough draft talk, what in the world is kind of going on with this command? What is that first number doing? What's the second number doing?
So Michelle, I got a comment that says the first number is giving us the first character to display, and the second number is giving us how many characters to display.
Let's check that. So like, what if I say start at the 3rd character and only display 4 of them? If that's, I think that's the thinking that was shared there. Let's see if that does that. So start at the 3rd character, M-I-C, yep, and display 4 of them, C-H-E-L. Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing some other people kind of agreeing with that and phrasing it another way as well in the chat. So thank you all so much for kind of giving voice to that and helping us think about like what this program does. It lets us print characters within a string starting at a certain position and for a certain number of characters. Okay. So what? Like, I wonder what we could actually use this command for, right? Like what kind of programs we could do with that. So one thing we might think about here is like earlier when we were displaying the name or whatnot, it displayed the full name. I wonder if we could have the program actually display each letter, each character from the name on a different line of code. Does that kind of make sense? Tony, can you rephrase what I'm trying to say but not doing a good job of?
Yeah, I think that would be great. So you're saying if it asks you for Michelle, then we want it to display M and then I and then C and then H, one on each line, kind of scroll through.
Yeah,
okay.
Like break the string up into each of its characters. Yeah, that's a better way of saying that. So how would I display just the first character? How would I edit this command to just display the first character? I'm thinking about Jenny's explanation. She said, okay, I'm seeing some ideas already in the chat. Perfect, thank y'all. So start at the first character and only display one character, something like that. Let's try it. What's your name? Michelle M. Oh, we're awesome. Okay, perfect. So then I wonder, Marcy, your foresight is impeccable. So then I wonder, like, that just displays one letter, one character. How could I then display the next character, right? So I would display the string name, start at the second character, is that right? And still just display one? Does that look right?
Yeah.
And then there's the MI. Okay, so I can do this. I'll just be here a little while. Y'all just chill out and, you know. And
so
then,
if we're just changing this one number over and over again, I think I agree with Marcy. I think we could put this in a loop.
Nice. Okay, and that's what Marcy's comment was. For those watching the recording later, Marcy said, hey, we could use a loop for this, right? And so Tony and I love to kind of do this like the first 2 or 3 times to show like, what would you do the long way? Because it really helps you see the fact that you are doing something again and again, and it also helps you set up the structure for a loop, right? So I think that's where we're going to go next. Like, how could we kind of do this within a loop to do all the letters in the name? So maybe let's do a for loop. I'm going to go get that from the control structures, a for loop. And if you were here for previous webinars, you've probably seen this structure before, that a for loop needs 3 parameters, or at least 3. It starts with a loop variable. We tend to use the letter I, but that's just kind of an arbitrary decision. And then where do we want the loop to start? And so we might say 1. And then where do we want it to end?
So here's where I have a problem, and a couple of us in the chat do as well, Michelle, because not everybody's name is the same length as yours. So what happens, I mean, we could say from 1 to 8 if we were talking about your name, but we're asking the user for their name. So how can we make this work for anybody's name?
Ooh, I see what you're saying. So like we've been using my name all night, so 8 will work for me, but somebody else has a different name, that's not going to work. Got it. So that's interesting, and I see some people kind of talking about it in the chat, and Tina asks, is there a count command? And I think what she's getting at is like, and Marcy's asking the same thing, like, is there a length or a way to say like how long this name is? And there is, and in Nspire, it's actually the same command we used for the length of an array. And so that may or may not kind of like ring a bell. But the command we used for that in Nspire is called dim, which was short for the dimension, right? Like the dimension or how many elements kind of were in that. So I think we can say dim of name. Is that right, Tony?
That looks good. I think we should try it.
Okay, and again, what does this mean? Like start at 1 and go until you get to however many characters there are in the name that's entered. Okay, we're almost done. We need to put a command in here. So we're going to use that disp command. I'm basically, actually, you know what? I will copy it. I'm going to go up and just grab one of these because we were doing this again and again, right?
Right.
And then what, if anything, needs to change in this? Like, what, if anything, would I need to change in this? Since we weren't doing name 1-1 each time, something was changing.
Right. So I see in the comments, we're going to change that first one to I, because that's the one that kept changing.
Perfect. And now this kind of matches what we're seeing in our step-by-step of the loop up here. I like it. Okay, I'm going to delete that part, and then we think this will work. Let's see what happens. So Control-R to run it. Hello. What's your name? Michelle. Oh, nice, y'all. And there's each letter on its own line. Let's run it again with a different name. So Tony, your name's shorter, so let's see what happens. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4. It runs through each of the 4 letters and then quits, so it doesn't run 8 times as we saw before, right? Nice.
Yes.
So then a nice extension or a challenge for us to think about is how might you edit this code so that it displays the letters in the name, but backwards. Like, what would that kind of look like if the user gives the name and then it would spell it out backwards? And it's just a few kind of changes from what we've done here so far. So we'll leave that one with y'all as something to kind of explore on your own to practice these ideas as well. Tony, we're just clicking right along. Hub, Rover, is that where you want to go next?
Yeah, I was thinking since we're already talking about strings, can we talk about how the Nspire communicates with the hub and the rover?
Sure, yeah. So many of us have had the opportunity, or we will soon, to learn with the Innovator Hub and the Innovator Rover. And the Hub is a programmable device that allows us to control like light and color, which is sound and color altogether, color and sound outputs. But it also lets us like collect brightness data. So all kinds of physical computing things that we can do. And then the rover is a programmable robot which has color and movement outputs. It also collects distance and senses color, and both of those devices can be programmed and controlled by the TI calculators. So I actually have my hub here, and I'm going to play some notes to y'all in just a second to show you that what's up with that. But I'm going to go over here and do like a brand new program, and again insert a brand new program, and maybe we'll just call this one sound or something like that. And we're going to explore a couple ideas about how the calculator uses strings to talk to the hub. So I'm going to go into the menu and down to the hub submenu and into send set. So I'm going to send a setting to my hub. And for now, I'm going to use sound because it's something you can hear from my hub across the miles. So I'm going to do a sound. And let's say I'll send a sound of 1,000 hertz for 2 seconds, maybe. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, and we'll see if you can hear the output from my hub. Tony, did that come through okay?
It did, loud and clear.
Okay. So this line of code, this one line of code that we've entered in, sends a particular frequency to the hub. So a frequency of 1,000 hertz is what we used for a time of 2 seconds. And the send set sound command requires these 2 numbers in order to run, the first one representing the frequency and the second one representing the time that the sound will play. So that's all well and good, but then we might notice some things about this. Like, it's interesting that it's actually sending this information in quotation marks. Like, what does that mean? And it has some interesting implications because this data is actually being sent to the hub in a string format, which is kind of interesting. So Tony, what do you want to do with this? Where do we want to go with this?
Well, I would kind of like to use a variable for the frequency because that was a really high frequency sound for me. So we could change it up.
Okay. So maybe we could do something like what we did before where we like ask for the name or ask for the age. We could ask what frequency they want to hear, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So we go to menu. We could again go to input output like we did before. Ooh, request or request string. I wonder about that. I'm going to try request because we are going to ask for a number. And we could say something like what frequency, maybe. Oops. Oh, man. Like that. And then maybe we'll do a comma and call this variable frequency and store it into that variable called frequency. Maybe?
Okay.
And then, so that will get the value from the user and it'll store it in that variable. And then we could go down here and, would we put it here, like this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we just put frequency right there in place of the 1,000. Right,
because we want to put that variable in, or whatever they give us as an input will go in that spot in the send set command. Okay, let me run it, see what happens. Missing. Why are you mad? Try it again. Missing. Stink. Okay, Melissa has an idea in the chat. She says maybe we need to string this. I've actually never tried this here. Have you, Tony?
No.
Let's see what happens. Still missing. It's mad. Okay. So that didn't work as we wanted it to. But I think we are kind of onto something here about what's going on. Like right now, this is literally going to send this string of characters to the hub, and it's not going to go pull the variable from here. It's going to just see that as a string of letters. And so there is a different command that we actually use for this purposes, and someone kind of mentioned in the chat. There's a command called eval, and eval is the command we need to use when the variable is numeric, and we're going to call it within this string when we're talking to the hub. So the eval command is really specific to the hub, and it's kind of like a, hold on, pause. Before you send this string, go ahead and get this value and translate it into a string first. That's like my layman's terms translation of what I think happens with that. So let's see if that works. Let's run it. Why is it still mad? What did I forget, Tony? You know what? I think I might have done something wrong with that whole line. So let me put it in again. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to abbreviate this because I think it might be mad about the variable name I chose. See, y'all think that we plan all of these mistakes, right, on purpose? Oh, no. Oh, no. Many of them are, like, completely off the cuff. So I just changed my variable name there to freak instead of frequency, and then I'm using this eval command instead. Let me run that. What frequency? Maybe like an 800, Tony? Nice. Run it again, maybe with that 1200. Nice. But then let's try it without this eval since it wasn't working before, but for other reasons. Like, could we have just done that? What frequency? Try 800. That was a different sound, y'all.
Yeah.
That's actually the error message. So that's telling us that we did something wrong in our code, and that's how we know that we need to actually kind of cast this numeric variable over into a string. Neat.
So Michelle, there's a question in the chat. Would it be possible to also ask the user for how long if we wanted to take the time to go into that?
Oh, yeah, sure. And we can just kind of quickly look at that, but we might have something like this and say, like, how long, and then store that to something like time. And then we could think about, so what would we insert here instead of the 2? We probably couldn't do just time, but we could do something like eval time or whatnot, and then give that same kind of control. Good question of, is time a reserved word? Time is not, but I think frequency is, which is why I was running into trouble. See that, how it kind of snaps to a variable? That's why I was running into trouble with that earlier. So yeah, I think that kind of might work. Let's see. A frequency of 1,000 for how long? Let's do 3 seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Perfect. Thanks. Awesome. Thank y'all. So this is just interesting for us to think about because Tony and I did a lot of hub and rover work for quite a while before we realized, oh my gosh, this is sending it as a string, and that's why we had to use these eval commands instead of just saying time, right? Because that was actually being interpreted as the characters T-I-M-E instead of the value that was stored inside that variable. Tony, you want to jump to coin flips?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay, I'm going to do a new program. Save, no, okay. Add a program editor. Now for this one, we're going to go through a little simulation, and we're going to think about how we could model a coin flip experiment, and then we could do some other kind of explorations with that. So for this, here's kind of the setup for this. We're going to model flipping a coin, and the results will come back as H's for heads or T's for tails. And so we're going to start by creating a string called results, and we'll make it an empty string. So I didn't put anything, not even a space inside there. It's just an empty string. And then what we'll do is we're going to add some lines of code that will kind of randomly add H's or T's to this string called results. And then we'll like kind of model like 10 different coin flips or 20 different coin flips or whatnot. So first we'll need to randomly decide whether a coin flips a heads or a tails, and we can do that with a random number generator command. So I might use an if statement first, but then I can use a command like rand int, and I'm going to type that in here, but we could get that from the catalog if we want to. And how rand int works is it randomly picks integers from something to something. So we're going to say, hey, pick a number between 0 and 1, and it has to be an integer. So there's only 2 integers from 0 to 1, 0 and 1. So it's going to pick 0 maybe half of the time and pick 1 the other half of the time. And so we'll say, hey, if this random integer equals 0, then do something. And else, do something different. And so this is where we might put in, like let's say that if it picks 0, that represents getting a heads. And then if it doesn't, then it represents getting a tails, if that makes sense. So here's what we'd like to do. Let's think about, we said that this was going to represent adding a heads into our results variable. Do you know what I mean? And so we want to add, let me see if I can think about this correctly. I don't want to say results gets H, right? Because that would just put an H there, which is okay the first time. But imagine like I want to build this string called results over time. So I actually want to do something like this. And I'm going to type it out, and I would love if y'all could share some of your thinking in the chat about what this line of code means. Results gets results and H. Like, what would that do? And while you're sharing your thinking on that, I'm going to put the opposite of that with tails in this else condition. But just share for a second about what would this line of code do? Results gets results and H.
So I'm getting some comments in the chat about it'll add H to whatever is already in the result, a continuation of the result.
Yeah, I like that, and that's a nice way of thinking about it. And when we have, this is only one if statement, so it's like, you know, it'll only be one element long anyways, but what if we wanted to do this again and again and again? What if we wanted to do it like multiple times? Like what if, I'm going to do this. Here we go. Tony, I'm going off script, so stay with me. Just kidding. What if we do a request statement and we ask the user like how many coin flips? Do you know what I mean? And they get to choose how many times this happens. So then we could say, we could store that to a variable called number of flips. But then say we want to do this process of adding an H or adding a T to the end of the string that many times, right? We want to do it again and again and again, however many times they told us to do it. So how can we do that?
So when you start saying again and again and again, I'm thinking a loop, and so are people in the chat. And
awesome.
I like what you did, Michelle, because I see that you highlighted everything that you want in the body of the loop, and so that's a really neat way, because when you go grab your loop structure, it's going to put it around the body that you've highlighted, right?
Nice. It does. It definitely does. So I'm going to do a little bit of formatting here because sometimes it adds in a couple extra spaces and I just can't let it go. So I'm going to pull those back a little bit. But then we can think about, so like we need a loop variable, maybe I, starting at 1 and going to how many times do we want to do this for? However many times the user told us, right? Number of flips. And then it's going to kind of run through this process of adding heads and adding tails. Maybe at the end we'll go ahead and display the results string to the user so they can see what happened. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So we get a request statement, how many coin flips? I'll say something like, I don't know, 10. Ooh, and then it's showing me here are your results from 10 coin flips. What if I said 20? Here are your results from 20 coin flips, and it's done kind of randomly or whatnot. So we have just about a minute or so left, but I want to show you where this is going, and this TNS file is included in the resources you'll receive. The top part of this is the code that we just wrote all together, where we start with an empty string called results. We ask how many flips. Then we have this for loop to kind of build the results, and then we display them to the user. This bottom part is new, and it uses a command called inString, which is a searching command. And it is searching inside the string called results that has all of our H's and T's. And here's what it's searching for, y'all. We're asking it to look for 5 heads in a row. And if that returns something other than 0, so it returns 0 if that never happened. Otherwise, it actually tells us where in the string that happened. If it returns anything except 0, that tells us that actually happened. It will then display a message that says, hey, 5 heads in a row. That's super cool. So let's run it and see what happens. Coin flips. Let's say we do 15 flips. Okay, y'all, seriously, that never happens on the first time. It says 5 heads in a row, and then we look right here, and there were. Let's run it again. So we didn't get 5 heads in a row, and so we didn't get our little message. And so now we could begin to kind of explore the math behind this, like how often does it happen that you get 5 heads in a row? What if you ran with only 10 flips? How often is it? Would you ever get 5 heads in a row? Like, does that ever happen? And so now we can kind of begin to explore some mathematics, but we built this with string formatting. So that kind of takes us to the end of the time we have here together today. Tony, anything else to add as we kind of turn it back over to Mike?
No, I'm glad everybody joined us, and I hope they'll join us for the next webinar on May 21st.
Yeah, and on that one, we'll be looking at searching and sorting, which kind of builds on, we just did a little bit of searching and sorting, or searching now. We're searching through strings, but there we'll be looking at kind of numerical searches and sorts as well.
Well, thanks so much, Michelle and Tony. We're going to have a really quick wrap-up here, but as we do, if anyone has any last-minute questions, please feel free to try to get those asked. I know we'll do our best to try and get those questions answered. When you leave the webinar site, a brief survey will automatically appear in your browser. Your feedback guides us as we plan future online events like the one coming up on May 21st. So if there's something that, you know, maybe you've been attending all 3 of these webinars so far and there's still something you're really excited to see that you haven't seen yet, please feel free to let us know, and we'll make sure that we do our best to try and get that included in the May 21st webinar. To receive a certificate of attendance, go ahead and click that link provided in the chat window. There's also a link there for the documents that were used tonight by Michelle and Tony. So those are going to be really helpful because a lot of the files that they use tonight are in there. So If those links aren't working for you for any reason, feel free to hang tight, check your email in a couple of days. You'll automatically get a follow-up email from us. And that follow-up email will be a link to the certificate, a link to the documents, and I think also a link to the recording, which is really nice to have. That way you can really go at your own pace. If you're watching this on demand, go ahead and copy that link down into your favorite browser to receive your certificate. Thanks so much, Michelle and Tony, for everything you shared tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you back online real soon. Have a great night.